Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. In the previous lecture, we developed understanding on key concepts of policies. Then we looked at different forms of governance, approaches and policy instruments, and we looked specific to the air. And we also looked at related global environmental agreements related to climate change, ozone and PBT. So in this part today, we'll look at air policies, and while doing that, we will be looking at the ambient air quality guidelines and standards for human health, and then we'll be looking at air quality guidelines and standards for vegetations and ecosystems. Then we'll look at what are the standards and guidelines for odor, then emission limits and standards, what are the parameters which guide what kind of standards we have, and then what are the guidelines set up, and then we'll look at the regulations for hazardous chemicals. So by looking at this, we'll simultaneously cover air guidelines and standards specific to India. And so the expected learning outcomes from you after completion of this session include that you should be able to list and describe and also synthesize the key international guidelines and standards related with air concerning the ambient air quality and then its impact concerning with ambient air qualities, particularly for human health, as well as then you should be able to describe about air quality guidelines and standards related with vegetation and ecosystem, and you should be able to identify guidelines which are there for odor, and then also the emission limits and standards, and then also lists the regulation related with hazardous chemicals. So looking at some of the key international guidelines and standards. So the key international guidelines and standards, we look into 5 domains when we look at these. So that was about how do we determine standards and guidelines, and now we are looking at the domains of standard and guidelines. So where all we find all these standards and guidelines. So one is related with ambient air quality guidelines and standards for human health. So what's good for us, what's the basic level which is there. So ambient air quality guidelines and standards are set based on that. Second, we see air quality guidelines and standards for vegetation and ecosystem. You also have guidelines and standards for odor, and then you also see emission limits and standards. Then also you see regulation for hazardous chemicals. So all these 5 domains you see where the guidelines and standards are usually set. So looking at ambient air quality guidelines and standards for human health. So the ambient air quality, the levels of pollution set within air quality standards are sometimes advisory. So you might see that they are not necessarily mandatory, but they can be advisory in nature, such as you see the WHO guidelines. They are advisory in nature, and then they can vary, or many countries cannot align to those standards. And you can see there are other which are mandatory and backed up with legislation, such as you have US standards, EU limit values, and then we also see the in India you see the CPCB standards which are there for national ambient air quality standards. You see those things. So you have certain which are advisory in nature, while there are certain which are mandatory. So it might completely depend on what's your context. So usually if you look at how to read these numbers, the concentrations are expressed either as mass of the substance per unit volume of air. So how much substance is there in the per unit volume of air, whatever volume of air you are taking. For example, micrograms per cubic meter. So how much pollutant, how much microgram pollutant is there in per cubic meter. So this is abbreviated as you can see here, a microgram per cubic meter. And then you see volume of the substance, or you can see volume of the substance to the volume of the air. So the pollutant compared to the volume of the air. So what's the proportion of that? For example, parts per million. So you can express it in parts per million or parts per billion, and they are abbreviated as ppm and ppb respectively. And these units can be converted from one to another using published conversion factors. So you can do those conversions. However, there might be slightly some variations in the standardization, local context variations might be there. So in the image here, we can see the comparative chart of like WHO. You can see the US national ambient air quality as well as EU air quality, and then how do they vary. At the same time, we'll be also looking at India's national ambient air quality standards. So you see that how they vary as per the what we can really apply, what we can really attain based on that. And health standards are different in different countries given the technical feasibility, economic feasibility as per the political and social context. So we see that WHO provides guidelines based on the observed health effect and has very high standards. And significant, we see that it has been noted that their significant success has been achieved through national and international policy and regulatory structure. So what kind of structure we have been able to be, we have been successful so far. And we have been able to reduce the emissions to a certain extent, and that's a positive indicator right now. So we also see that some pollutants like carcinogenic pollutants, arsenic, benzene, chromium, and all these have not been given in the guidelines. So it depends upon what really has to be included in the list. And you also see there are certain exposure effects are also provided, and which helps as a guideline to manage risk, and then how to manage risk about the major health impacts. And they also give guidelines, also give the short-term and long-term exposure, what happens with the various level of exposure to the pollutants. Among the guidelines, we would also find IFC, Performance Standards, Environmental Health and Safety guidelines, which these guidelines provide technical advice. So this is again advisory with general and industrial specific examples. So you can see here to meet the performance standards. So whenever the projects are undertaken for funding through World Bank, so they have to meet these standards. So you will find that Infrastructure Planning Commission Performance Standard 3 is also there, which provides resource efficiency and pollution prevention. So here all the commercial clients, people who are investing, they are required to integrate pollution prevention, and they need to adopt control technology and practices to all these for the purpose of funding. So the guideline states that the projects with significant air emissions, so wherever the significant air emission is there, so one needs to or they have to be looked into in terms of how those impacts can be minimized, and those guidelines and those standards have to be met. So in India, we see that we have national ambient air quality standards. So air pollution, air quality regulation, and action for like reduction of air pollution. This all is undertaken under the provision of Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. So under this Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981 and Environmental Protection Act 1986, this mechanism is prescribed. In the image, you can see National Ambient Air Quality Standard, and then where you evaluate whether the impact is significant or unacceptable. And based on these values, you see that emission, discharge, load, what is the load and the characteristic of the load, and whether whatever activity is being undertaken is the resultant environmental quality exceeding or it's violating the standards or not. So all those kind of things you make here. So you can see In the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, the first column shows you all different kind of pollutants here, and then you see the time weighted, and then you see industrial, residential, rural and other areas. Ecologically sensitive areas also has been identified, and how you're going to really measure them. You can see in the column number 6 how you're going to measure them. The modes of measurements are also provided. So when you do the assessments, you refer and you're guided or bound by these acts which are in place. We also find National Air Quality Monitoring Program, which is there in India, and CPCB is executing this program nationwide, and this is called as National Air Quality Monitoring Program, NAMP. So within this, the main purpose of NAMP is to determine what's the status and the trend in ambient air quality. So through this, we keep monitoring, and we try to confirm whether the prescribed, whether we are able to meet the ambient air quality as per the standards or not, and how we are doing as per cities, and what understanding we are developing about what is working, what prevention is working, or corrective measures are working or not. And then we also try to understand the natural cleansing process. So as per our environment, a lot of things naturally cleanse, so whether that's taking place or not, and natural cleansing through dilution, dispersion, and wind based movement and all these things. So whether it's a lot of things can be taken care naturally. So these are set up to regularly monitor our status, as well as to see what is working and not working. So there are a range of pollutants which are looked through this NAMP. So you have sulfur dioxide, oxides of nitrogen, and then you have suspended particulate matter. So all these are monitored. Fine particulate matter, PM, so which you will come across a lot, and this is all monitored by NAMP program. And along with this, also relative humidity is taken care of, temperature is also added with this, and then monitoring of pollution is carried 24 hours, and the sampling is done for all these gaseous pollutants, 8-hourly sampling for particulate matter. So we keep this record all the time, 8 hours particulate matter. So these are recorded, and these are available as source for data for your calculation purpose. So this monitoring and everything is done, taken care with the help of CPCB, Central Pollution Control Board, as well as State Pollution Control Board, and then there's also National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, NEERI, located in Nagpur. Then you see that CPCB coordinates with all these agencies to ensure uniformity and consistency of air quality data. So you see this institutional setup which is there. So now moving on, we see that similarly United States National Ambient Air Quality Standards are also there. You have Clean Air Act, which provides like the federal law, the central law that regulates air emissions, and it looks at the air emissions from the stationary as well as the mobile sources. So if you think some of the air pollution must be coming from the stationary sources, we'll look into it more in detail when we deal with air in the methods section. So what all sources are there? So they identify this for stationary and mobile sources. Then also the law empowers the Environmental Protection Agency to establish national ambient air quality. So they are going to establish what standards we are going to set up, and set up for public health and public welfare, and those standards for also for the emission and also for the hazardous air pollutants. So we see that there are primary standards and there are secondary standards. So primary standards provide public health protection, whereas the secondary standards provide also like certain other lighter health concerns like visibility, damage to animals, crops, vegetations, and protection. So you see the primary standards as well as secondary standards. So that was about the USA. Then you also see in Europe Union, you have air quality limit values. So they had air quality standard in form of mandatory health-based limit values, and they had more stringent non-mandatory guide values to protect the environment. And guide values are intended to be long-term objectives. Here, what you see. Here you see the European Communities Framework Directive on Ambient Air Quality Assessment and Management, which is available. And the values are specified in series of, you will see the Daughters Directive, with the first one being agreed in 1999 and which covered range of like SO2, particulate matter, then you have NO2 and lead, and you see that later on Daughters directives also had ozone, and then benzene and carbon monoxide. All these were also included in the list of the directives. So a very recent directive is of 2008, which combines most of the existing legislation in the country. We are talking about UK, Europe area. We are talking about Europe. This introduced new air quality objective for PM 2.5, and this permits certain time extensions for member states to comply with the limit values. So we cannot attain this limit value immediately, so there's certain time period which can attain those targets. So now moving into another domain, air quality guidelines and standards for vegetation and ecosystems. So we may think of how complex it would be to determine the effect of air pollution on vegetation and ecosystem because of the complexity. And because of this complexity, you would require different expertise and different expert areas, and they all need to coordinate together. Like you would need air quality expert, scientist, and ecologist also to come together. So this is a very difficult, complex area, but that's also done. And then you may also know that this area is also an evolving area. So we are developing our understanding. We do not have complete understanding as of now, and we see constant improvement in this area. So as we can think of in a very simple way of our day-to-day observation of our environment and our activity, because of air pollution, there is a deposition on vegetation and ecosystem. So this deposition is of certain quality. So whatever layers come, they have certain, they are of certain quantity, and then they are deposited for certain duration, and then they are also based on the sensitivity of the receiving environment. So who is receiving, how sensitive they are. So that all determine how much impact and significance it would have. So that all we'll study in the method section also, but just for the overview at this moment. So for reference, for how much loads are of concern on an ecosystem, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe provides critical loads for deposition into sensitive ecosystem. And in India's case, you saw there was a column which mentioned for the sensitive ecosystem. So we also have those guidelines in place, and then how we take care of it. So anything beyond the prescribed value is considered as a pointer for potential damage. So you also see UK Air Pollution Information System, which provides all these critical loads and levels for key pollutants. And example of critical levels and source of limit value are shown in this table, you can see. So Indian National Ambient Air Quality Standards also provide a useful guide to critical loads and levels. And you can see the examples of critical levels and source of limits value. You can see here the ecological sensitive, you can see the ecologically sensitive area notified by central government and what is the value given there. So you will see that the value is much lesser compared to the industrial, residential and rural and the other areas. So we see that substances released to the air do not need to be assessed for deposition to ground unless they contribute to acidification and eutrophication. So they are very selective. So you would see there is selective list. So only those which are of concern are taken into consideration. Then there's also critical loads for nutrient nitrogen, which is also set under the Convention on Long Range Transboundary Air Pollution. So, these standards are set based on the experiments and the other studies which have been done. So, you can see here the loads for nutrients nitrogen, how they are given, and you can see how it is given for different ecosystem type. You can see here on the first column, you can see the coniferous woodland and all this is given here. And for that, what's the range and what's the indicator of critical load exceedance. So, how you will evaluate it. So, those all are mentioned here. So, that these all documents can be referred. So, in Europe, critical loads are assigned to habitat classes of European Nature Information System, and this enables consistency of habitat terminologies. And then the critical value loads are given in the range of like you have kg per kg nutrients per hectare per year to reflect variations in the ecosystem response. So, in the table taken from Air Pollution Information System of UK, you can find nutrient nitrogen critical load range for use in air pollution and impact assessments and by habitat type for assessment that are part of like planning applications and also for environmental impact assessment and all the procedure you would be required to do that. So, in the first column underlined with red, you can see the different habitat such as marine habitat, inland surface water, mire, bog, fen habitat, grassland, tail fob habitat. So, all these habitats have been mentioned. The second column you can see highlighted in green shows the critical load range in kg nutrient nitrogen per hectare per year. And the third column highlighted in yellow color shows value used at screening stage. In the fourth column, you can see the value used in detailed assessment stage. So, how even with the EIA process at the screening stage and at the assessment stage, what are the values acceptable? And then the link is also provided for downloading these values. So, I have given you the link here. So, now moving on to the other aspects, now we will look at the order, guidelines and standards. So, there is no internationally recognized standards, so but many of the nations have set up standards for this, and we'll also look at it when we deal with methods in air domain. So, the precise definition of order and how it is assessed in concentration terms varies from country to country. So, tolerable level would vary from location to location as well. So, country to country also it will vary from location to location, and higher level of order may be tolerable. For example, in industrial area you might be able to tolerate higher order compared to in your residential area, and you would be able to tolerate some level of order in the like restaurant and other places. So, there is always relativity, and then you have European Order Unit. UK provides that. So, European Order Unit, which is abbreviated as OUE. So, one OUE represents the threshold, so a certain value where 50% of the members, so members who are going to set that of the panel detect the order in the laboratory conditions. So, they are able to 50% of the people are able to detect that. So, that is considered as 1 OUE, and this may fluctuate also. And then so these are like fluctuating, this may vary. Then you have certain concentration levels also in which this order is expressed. So, mass unit of pollution set up for acceptability of a particular order depending on a particular land use. So you have like in terms of percentile also it is mentioned. So in India, Schedule 2 and Schedule 6, General Standards for Discharge of Effluent under Environmental Protection Rules 1986, prescribe that all efforts shall be made to remove unpleasant odor as far as practicable. So we have that very broader consideration here. And it also depends on the level of complaint and annoyances. We also go by that. So that also can fluctuate because people may not complain. So it varies across. You also see the FIDOL parameter, FIDOL, which is defined in terms of like you can see intensity, duration, order, unpleasantness, and location, which you see here. So based on that, it is FIDOL factors are given. So you see the intensity. So how the individuals, how like you and me would like really perceive the strength of the order, how what will be our acceptability level, and then the duration, overall duration that individuals can really tolerate that over the time, and how unpleasant it is, the character, and then where it is located. So based on that, this FIDOL factor has been identified. And then you also see Institute of Air Quality Management guidance given by UK, which also suggests order effect descriptors based on researchers' sensitivity for range of predicted order concentration. So UK adopts order management regulatory guidance. Then you can see in the table where the order is classified into 3 categories. You can see offensive range where you and then various offensive ranges are given. So you can see how it is given: most offensive, moderately offensive, less offensive. So most offensive would be like decaying animals, fish remains, septic things, and then you will see moderately offensive like sugar, beet processing, and livestock rearing. Less offensive could be like you can have brewery, bakery, restaurant, and that's all kind of things, so which are less offensive in nature. So you can see all those here, categories here. So you also see order is recognized as the problems nuisance in industries. So you see those also under Environmental Protection Rules of 1986. You can see the petroleum refinery, fermentation industry, natural rubber industry, large pulp, coffee processing, and then what kind of compliance norms for order has to be kept, you can see. So those are mentioned here, you can refer. Then there are emission limits and standards. So air quality standards refer to the levels of air pollution to which people and ecosystems are exposed. Another type of legislated standard is the emission standard. So these standards are also there, and then emission standards are usually derived from consideration of cost and effectiveness of available control technology. So what kind of technology we have, how expensive it is going to be, and how effective it is going to be. Based on that, we will decide upon what will be the limits and standards. Then we also see USA Pollution Prevention Act, then we also see EU Industrial Emission Directives, and then also IFC Environmental Health and Safety Guidelines. So you can find all those here for your further reading. All these provides emission from point source, and it suggests that it should be avoided, and it also emphasizes the combined application of process, modification, emission control. So all these tools should be used together. That's what is suggested. So now there's a lot of pressure on reduction of the emission, and the emphasis is laid on technology development and use of clean fuel. You may refer to IFC Environment, Health and Safety Guidelines and good international industry practice also. So you can see that also how we are guiding development. So there's also now looking at the regulation for hazardous chemicals. So here you see that we also have regulation for hazardous chemicals. So in many development cases, like whenever the development will happen, some of the development activity might be dealing with the materials which are like damaging for the people if something goes wrong. So EIA, environmental impact assessment, should indicate what kind of prevention measures are being taken so to avoid those kind of accidents. And then you see that European EIA directives also provide that. And these directives control major accidents, hazards of these dangerous substances. You have Seveso 3 directives, which really looks at the prevention of accidents. So these are available. And then it's also toxicology, like different toxicology of particular chemicals that could be released in the event of accident is also required to be prepared in EIA. So that's all listing has to be done for EIA purpose. Then we also find that in our country we also have hazardous chemical amendment rule 1989, which again provides the entire listing and it regulates the manufacture, storage, and how the things have to be imported. So, or if you are dealing with hazardous chemicals in India, so it will have regulations related with manufacturing, storage, and import of the substance, as well as the transport of these chemicals. And that's all guided by the 1989 rules. So, that is there. Regulation for hazardous chemicals, you can look here at CPCB site. So that was for this session. So summarizing what we really covered today, we looked at the key international guidelines and standards pertaining with ambient air quality guidelines related with human health. Then we looked at all these guidelines related with vegetation and ecosystem. And then we looked at the order, the guidelines associated with it, the standards associated with it, and then we looked at the emission limits and standards, and then finally we looked at the regulation for hazardous chemicals. So these were our references for today for this particular session, and these are the suggested watch and read. Please feel free to ask questions, let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinions, experiences and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring AIA. Thank you.